Hello, my name is Jeff. Welcome to this week's Office Hours. Hopefully you can hear me okay. This is the time set aside every week to discuss things singing related, music related, or just for fun. The chat is open, I'm reasonably sure. So feel free to chime in if you have questions, concerns, comments, thoughts. We can talk about the weather if you like. It's beautiful here today in sunny Northern California. It's a little bit chillier, but that's typical of the mornings. The marine layer burned off rather quickly. So we've got lots and lots of sunshine. Right, there's a couple things. It is repair week here at the... This seems weird. Why? There we are, Mrs. Webster. Hello. I was like, maybe the chat's not working, but thank you, Mrs. Webster, for breaking the ice on the chat. I appreciate that. Good afternoon to you, I think it is, or something to that effect where you're located. It's repair week here at the old Rolka Productions studio facility. I have sent... You can't call them care packages. I'm inclined to call them care packages because they're, filled with microphones and audio gear. But I've sent packages to Chicago, Tennessee, Southern California, and I've got one more to do. And then I think I'll have all the stuff that needs repairing finally in the hands of the people who can do it. I was tempted. I was sorely tempted to pull out my soldering iron and have a go at one of my microphones. But I was wisely persuaded to send it to the professional. Though I have, in fact, soldered audio componentry in the past. Let's see now. Okay, but I digress. FYI, the reason why I said all that is because if the sound on the videos for the past couple weeks hasn't entirely been awesome or up to snuff, it's because my audio interface decided that it was going on furlough indefinitely. But hopefully that'll get repaired and get back to me within the next couple weeks. Noon, of course. So just into the afternoon. Martin, good evening, everyone, and good evening to you, Martin. Kiwi Girl, second winter in Northern Michigan. Northern Michigan. Marquette, perhaps? Are you above the Mackinac Bridge or below the Mackinac Bridge? Sheboygan, Petoskey, Traverse City, all gorgeous places. Hello, all Mark Morgan. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today and welcome. Actor Flautista, greetings from a tenor contratenor. Thank you so much for your videos. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening, where you happen to be. Micro Geek, howdy. Howdy, partner. Mrs. Webster at Mark Morgan. Oh, Micro Geek, you fixed those things. Oh, Stryker. There you go. Mark Morgan, hi, Mrs. Webster. Oh, right, sorry. You're saying back to Mrs. Webster. The Bridge, hello. Hi, Stryker. Good morning, JC's Radiant Ray. Kiwi Girl, Traverse City is so beautiful. I am fondly reminded of my summers spent at the Interlochen. Back in the day, I went to the National Music Camp. Now, of course, I think the summer program there is all stayed at Interlochen, and also it's just all under the umbrella of the Interlochen Arts Academy. But it was the Arts Academy and the National Music Camp were separate when I went there. In Baldwin and BC. Very cool. Nathan, hello. I've done all your tenor warm-ups and tutorials. What's next? Wow, that's incredible. Good job. My question is actually, how long have you worked on them? Going through them once is not necessarily the end of the story. But I would say that I thank you, by the way. Thank you for watching all that. But thank you also to those of you in the newsletter that literally overwhelmed me with the responses to the one questionnaire that I sent out a couple weeks ago. I haven't actually gotten started going through all of the responses. I had to go. I'm pretty old school, so I went and printed off the responses. But I've got to start weeding through those, and I'm going to produce all the videos to answer all those questions. But the next step for you, if you're interested, Nathan, might be to get involved in the upper register singing course, which is going to be available hopefully in the next 2 months. I need to do a lot of video editing. I got to make some more videos, and then that will go out. That will all be done via the newsletter. I won't really discuss it much at all here on YouTube. So if you go over to jeffrolka.com, sign up for the newsletter, you'll get all the information on that. Always winter in northern Michigan. I can dig it. Yeah, it can be cold up there. Why some vowels are called headier and some are called chestier. Now that I have to admit, I haven't come across that terminology used for vowels. Of course, we talk about that all the time in terms of vocal tone, quality, timbre. Now, the way that I usually refer to vowels and the way we talk about it typically is between narrow and wide. I'm not exactly sure how or if that even compares to the terminology that you're using there. But when we talk about vowels like that, we're actually talking about them as they form in the speaking voice. So inherently, depending on, and we're talking about it as it relates to the English language speaking voice. So if you have an accent of some kind, if English is not your first language, or if, for example, you're from Australia or New Zealand, or the UK, the inflections that you impart upon those vowels will be slightly different. So narrow and wide are the terms that we use to talk about them. In English language music, in general, the E vowel is considered to be a narrow, forward focusing vowel. So it tends to, in the speaking voice, want to come forward, and it's a very narrow vowel. It focuses easily, or it's tight. You may notice the tongue lifting in the rear of the oral cavity, E, as opposed to ah, which is a more open sound, again, as it relates to English language speaking. We learn to reconcile those differences so we get consistent vowel response across the registers. And just in general, really, not across the registers only, just in singing. Ba-da-ba-da-ba. Robret, good afternoon. Microgeek, apologies, in office today and under my work ID. Little cheeky live event here in the old office. Kiwi Girl, jealous. They just released their lineup for the 2018 Arts Festival. I'm sure it's fantastic. Yeah, I feel very fortunate to have been able to go there. It was not in any I mean, certainly my family was very supportive, but also when I did go to the National Music Camp, it was expensive, but I was able to get a scholarship, so that was really, really good. Incredibly grateful for those opportunities. It was being able to dive into that. I wished I could have gone a little bit earlier. I went between my junior and senior years in high school. But I think that was actually probably a really appropriate time for me to go too. It was a time when I knew what I wanted to do, and I could really dive into the studies there, and I learned a lot. It was incredible. It was an incredible experience. I would recommend it to anyone. I'm actually master geek at Microgeek. Well, that's what you want to be then. I mean, you want to be the top geek. If you're going to be a geek, you want to be the top geek. That's excellent. Laughing out loud. Just one question was hard. Yeah, exactly. One question. There was only one. It was really hard. Kiwi, also, what are your thoughts on mini humidifiers, vaporizers? Yeah, I mean, especially in northern Michigan in the winter, if you're using fan-forced central heating, then the air can be incredibly dry. If you're sensitive to that, by all means, use a humidifier or a vaporizer. I know my mom still lives in Michigan, and I know that she runs a humidifier in the winter months to combat how dehydrating it can be with the fan-forced heating, central heating. There's a couple. You have to be careful with a couple things. I mean, obviously, you have to keep the filters clean, otherwise mold can grow in there. And if mold grows in your filters and starts spraying the spores all over the place, it can just be a health hazard. Central heating systems often have humidifier components to them. you might look into that if it's really troublesome to you. Basically, if you're getting so dehydrated, if the air is so dry, then by all means, I think that's great. We've got to. The main thing is to listen to our bodies, listen into what the body is telling us, and respond to it appropriately. JC's Radiant Ray at Micro Geek. I wanted to say Micro Greek, like a little tiny Greek. He'd have a little bouzouki and a tiny, tiny cup of ouzo. My dad is from New Zealand. There you go. My brother-in-law is about to move to New Zealand. Very exciting. I think that spells trip to New Zealand in the future for me. Though I'm not sure. That's a long flight, man. At MicroGee, my dad is, Jeff, I do your tenor warm-ups daily, but working on strength so voice doesn't go up into falsetto. Okay, that's good. Would you recommend any exercises to strengthen transverse abdominis? Well, that's a very interesting question. And I also wonder about your usage of the word falsetto. If you're crossing the secundopassaggio and it's getting airy, then you are abducting the vocal fold. And especially if you're a tenor, then that secundopassaggio is around F4, give or take, F4, F sharp 4, G4, depending on the specifics of your FOC. If it's getting airy on you, that's not really the most efficient use of your voice. That's a smooth transition across the secundopassaggio into what would commonly be called head voice. But by balancing things out, you get a much more substantial sound, and there's a lot more leeway for strength and volume. My advice to you is if you are using a classic falsetto, that's a wrong way of phrasing it. Scratch that. Forget that classic sense of falsetto. If you're producing a falsetto tone at around F4, then you are missing a range of your voice. You're not making a smooth transition over your secundopassaggio. You're not allowing the cricothyroid muscles to act on the thyroarytenoid or vocalis muscle. And as such, you're not getting into your head voice effectively, and that completely denies you voce piena in testa, the sound of your chest voice and your head voice. Balance things out below the secundopassaggio, work on that transition, and then I think you'll find you have lots more power. As for strengthening the transverse abdominis, most apagio breath management exercises will, unless there's been some trauma to your transverse abdominis, just the practice of apagio over time will strengthen it, I think, quite nicely. Keeping in mind that there's a great disparity between the size of muscles in the core of your body. I mean, and think about the transverse abdominis. This is a large muscle compared to the musculature that's around the larynx. You've got rather largest, and singing mixed singer pants could speak more to the size and volume of this musculature in the core of the body. But these are bigger muscles by a long shot compared to what's in your larynx. It's often not strength, it's the coordination and how you are managing the musculature and its interactions with the larynx that's the issue. Again, unless there's been some trauma, or there's been some reason for that to atrophy. But again, like the diaphragm's motions are autonomic. Like they're part of the central nervous system. You don't remind yourself to breathe every time you take a breath. The diaphragm is doing it for you in expanding the rib cage and engaging the core body muscles in order to interact with the diaphragm. What we're actually working to do is to keep it fairly passive in the process of phonation. Trying to encourage my husband. He has a naturally nasal sound. What should I suggest for him? He only learns songs by listening, so he copies whatever artist does the song. Echolalia. That's very interesting. Great sense of humor today. Thanks, guys. I need to have a good laugh today. Well, I will work on that and hopefully provide some laughter. Nasal sounds are tricky. Balancing things out, the thing is if he's only learning by rote, which is to say, when we learn by rote, we listen and then we repeat. We listen, repeat, listen, repeat. That's what learning by rote is. If he's only learning by rote, then then you're sort of you're trying to do something different without doing anything different. If we want a different result, oftentimes we have to do something different. For beginning vocalists, the short vowel exercises, he, we, you, can go a long way in terms of helping one feel what it's like to sing without having everything so far forward. Additionally, one of my favorite exercises, I talk about it a lot here, I know, but the NG sound, most of us are having that. The nomenclature would say we're coming forward with it. We're placing the sound forward into the mask. It's not exactly what's happening, but it helps us to direct the airflow properly and use the proper muscles, so we talk about it in those terms. You can just as easily, however, go back with it. Hopefully you can hear those changes in tone. And if he's really, really sinusy or nasally, he can use that exercise directing the sensations back, and that may help him remove some of the nasality from his tone. One thing he could do while singing along is he could sing the songs, learning by rote, and just pinch his nose while he's singing. Pinch, release, pinch it. If he's feeling vibrations with his fingertips, try to get them to stop. See if he can learn to redirect his attention and the locus of sound so that those vibrations stop. And then you practice releasing and then pinching after a little while. And if the sensations return, then you know you still need to practice more. You just go back and forth with that. Excellent micro. I'm probably going to say micro Greek. I don't mean to. Very, very good. At Micro Greek. Yeah, it's a great place, man. I would highly recommend it for anyone who can go. Mrs. Webster, great. Yeah, we try. I read that. That's right. Emmanuel, Abel's voice on the new mixtape is amazing. Excellent. Yes, 12:11, drink tea. Oh, right, yes. Yeah, not me. You guys drink the tea. I didn't make any tea today. 12:11, I feel like I'm a little bit behind. I feel like it should have happened sooner than that. That seems a little bit I'm a little bit slow on the uptake today. I will definitely make sure that I deal with that. Okay, back to New Zealand. Be prepared for the 15-hour leg of your trip from LA to Auckland. Oh, that sounds awesome. It's totally worth it, though. Where in New Zealand would you be visiting when you go? Sorry for the rabbit trail. No, not at all. This is what we're here for. This is super fun. I think they're moving. I think he's moving to the north. I'm not exactly sure where that. I've been told the city name, and I've totally forgotten it. 15 hours. That's a little bit longer than our trips back to the UK. Jeff, it sounds airy and light, so I thought it was falsetto. Well, yeah, okay. Yes, I am looking for a more substantial sound, but this is a lot higher than F4, more like A or B. Well, that's different. So A or B for a male tenor. B4, right below C5, is the appropriate transition into B4, C5 is the transition point for the male tenor into falsetto. However, if you're falsetto up to that area, then, or if it's area up to that point, then you're not making the transition. If you're belting up to A or B4, you're again not making the transition, and that's another reason why it's abducting when you get to A or B, because I don't know if you necessarily need to move through your head voice, from thyroarytenoid to cricothyroid dominant singing, ultimately to falsetto. But the disparity between a belted voice and the falsetto range, when not approached through the cricothyroid dominant singing voice, is quite wide. The breath energy and the force that you have with the thyroarytenoid muscles, the vocalis muscle, is rather significant, particularly if you're belting that high. That it's not surprising to me that it's all kind of blowing off into an airy, abducted sound. Again, my advice to you is to work through the secondo passaggio to achieve voce piena in testa. That will smooth out your way into your falsetto range. And by falsetto, I haven't warmed up today, but I'm going to do it anyway. So let me turn this down ever so slightly so I don't explode. So here's the thing, right? Chest voice, head voice at the top, right? Now that was D major, so that's an A right there, right? As I move to E flat, I've got a B flat. B4 right below C5. I'm entering my falsetto range, but because I've made a smooth transition into my cricothyroid dominant singing voice, the transition into falsetto isn't quite so abrupt. This is F major, so F to C5. Sorry, that was a little bit gross. So D5. I hope that's not clipping too much. I did turn it down, but I can see that I clipped a little bit. It does have a limiter on it. Anyways, the point is that if we go through the secondo passaggio, if we make that smooth transition, then we can get into the falsetto range where the vocal fold is going to abduct or separate ever so slightly, and there's going to be a slight amount of dampening. And that's going to give us a more full sounding voice. David Walsh, afternoon. Have you come across the concept of inhaling or drinking the tone? Yeah, inhalare la voce. Yep, that comes up every once in a while. I think it last came up 2 or 3 weeks ago. I should have a quick link that I could reference. The differences in inhalare la voce or inhaling. Did I say inhaling the drink? Inhaling the tone. When I've read about it, I recall that there are not a terribly great number of differences between like how I'm talking about things and the way that I describe things. There are a few. I feel as if there was one thing about it. It may be that particular practice advocates the concept of 360-degree breathing. That sounds right to me, which conceptually I have some problems with. But given that many of us understand the physical occurrences of our bodies differently, many of us think about things. We come about. Mrs. Webster and I have talked about this before. We think about things differently. We have different modes of learning, and our understandings of things. One description for me may work great, and it may be a perfectly reasonable description, and it may not work at all for someone else. And so 360 breathing may work really well for people, but I feel like there are a few. I'm not terribly thrilled with it conceptually because I feel that it describes things that are not entirely accurate. But it might still help you to think about them that way if other modes of teaching appoggio or breathing don't work for you. You're very welcome, Mark. Excellent. Well, I'm really glad. But I hadn't thought about. Yeah. I mean, well, in talking through your questions, Mark, and which has been awesome. Like, thank you very much. In working through it, upper register phonation requires a fairly high degree of precision from a variety of different things. We need to have good expansion. We need to have good consistent engagement. you could hear like in those scales that I was singing there, I wasn't maintaining adequate engagement as well as I should have done while I was descending. And so I wasn't really making as good a transition down out of that range of my voice as I can do. Um, it's a I think that I'm not sure that it ever gets more forgiving, but we become accustomed to the sensations and accustomed to the requirements of upper register singing, and as such, we get used to it. So it feels like it gets more forgiving, but I don't know that it does. I certainly hope that that helps. No trauma. Right. Dear Jeff, I have noticed that when some people do a mic check, they sing very softly while others belt. How do you I suggest how do you I suggest how do you suggest I approach a mic check? That's an interesting question. Um, this is going to become a game. I can tell right now if it isn't already. Um, but I do like that question. Um, there are lots and lots of different modes of thought. Your sound engineer will tell you to give you the softest and the loudest, as if somehow they're gonna have a dB meter. I actually, when I do sound, I do take a dB meter with me, but I would never do this. As if they're gonna take a dB meter with two readings and then average the distance and like set the gain between the two. No, what they want to do by getting the loud check from you is make sure that things don't clip. And noble as that is, um, if the ensemble that you're singing in is using different dynamics, as many do, then you can quickly get overpowered by them in the front of house, uh, sound, the way that it's been mixed. So I would suggest that no matter what the sound engineer tells you, and this is assuming that you have good microphone technique. If you don't have good microphone technique, you risk something else, which I will address momentarily. But I would suggest you give them just a very even um, mezzo piano kind of volume, knowing that you are going to be responsible for working the microphone during the performance. What this means is that they won't have to ride the fader. Sound engineers, sure, I don't know. Maybe ideally, every band would have their own dedicated engineer who would show up at rehearsals as well as performances, and they would know all the fader moves and stuff like that. On digital consoles, those, in a set that's done night after night after night, those fader moves can be programmed if you're, playing with a click that's synced to the digital console. But that's not the reality for most of us. So do a mezzo piano-ish kind of mic check, knowing that you're going to work the mic, because if you don't work the mic, so let's say you give them the mezzo piano, but then you fail to work the mic, the first big high note that you sing will probably get you turned down in the mix. And there will probably be no recovery from that in the front of house mix. And if they're running everything post fader in the monitors, which they shouldn't be doing, but if they are, then you also won't hear yourself in the monitors. Monitors should be run pre-fader. Micro Geek, Jeff, are there words or whatever they call them that jazz artists use normally that one could learn? D, da, B, bop, boo sound right, but Durfee doesn't sound right. Thoughts? Yeah, I would. Sure. I mean, I would also suggest to you. Yeah, I would. Yes, there are. I would venture to guess that most jazz musicians would understand most of how we talk about music, in the classical realm. But as always, there's going to be words that are specific to the genre, and that may not necessarily translate. In case in point, I'm thinking of swing. Swing in the classical sense is executed and referred to in one way, and when we talk about swing from a jazz sense, even though I think people are trying to mean the same things, the way it's manifested is very different in the jazz environment. Um, there are articulations that I'm thinking of as a reed player that I don't even that are done when you hear it, but I don't know that there's a name for it, specifically a muting of half of a reed. Um, I suppose that we might refer to it as ghosting notes, but it's also used in swinging it. Um, certainly in jazz chord symbol notation, it's quite common to, at least we always talked about things, even though I might be looking at a chart with all of the chord symbols on it, we would often refer to them by their Roman numerals. So, I wouldn't say, like watch out for that D minor G7 section right there. I would say watch out for the 2-5, the second chord, five, 2 chord, 5 chord related to the key. Um, and I would suspect that from each locale to, from one locale to another, you'd have different kind of catchphrases and parts of the vernacular that are common. Kiwi girl, do you have any suggestions for someone singing Irish music? Different accents singers use in a song, how to make them flow smoothly. I do Irish singing and dance. Insight is appreciated. I think, actually, you make a very, very, that's a very interesting question. Um, it's actually something that we don't talk about very much here. Now that I've thought about it, um, and I do that. I ought to think more about that. In your case, studying, listening and studying your um, influence, the people who influence you, the people that you're listening to, how they go through their accents and how they do things. In an extreme case, you might consider getting elocution lessons or someone who can teach voices and how to accent things so that you do as authentic a job with the pronunciation as possible. Especially if you're singing in Gaelic, that can be incredibly challenging and uh, I don't know if you've seen that. There's a YouTube video of the weatherman from, I think he's in Wales. The weatherman who says, it's like this massive name, this massive Gaelic name of the town. It's amazing. It's so beautiful. It's beautiful. Let's do it. Check it out. You probably, if you type like, weatherman pronouncing Gaelic town or something, it'll probably come up. So cool. But yeah, like working on being able to accurately uh, sing that be quite challenging. Studying your heroes um, is a good way to do that. I'm reminded of Dave Liebman. I attended a workshop with him, and he talked about his process for coming to an understanding and giving an authentic. Now he's a saxophone player. Primarily plays soprano these days. He maybe exclusively. Um, and he talked. His process was, and I doubt he's done this for decades, but when he was coming up, as they say, um, it was all about listening to your idols, transcribing your idols, so that you could play note for note what they were playing on their solos, and probably the heads of the tunes as well. Um, and then he would go so far as to then record, not like fully record in a studio, but just do a scratch recording of himself playing the heads and the solos as transcribed from his idols, and comparing and contrasting the two. You want to talk about like getting in deep, that would be it. I mean, if nothing else, the level of acuity that you will be listening to things and hearing the subtleties of the music that you're practicing would be expanded upon greatly. JC's Radiant Ray, I've recently noticed a significant improvement in my voice. Will I ever reach the point when my voice reaches a limit? I would say that's a very interesting philosophical. There we go again. I'm making up for lost time, Mrs. Webster. That's a very interesting philosophical point. Hard to say. I would say I doubt it. I don't know. No. It's hard. Uh, it's hard for me to imagine ever not wanting to get better still. Um, I think I've. It's probably been a while, but I feel like at least once or twice in our conversations here, I've mentioned that mastery of something is being able to envision envision what you're doing, so singing or playing, envision it just a little bit outside of your grasp. Like that is what it is to have mastery over something. Like I can imagine this just a little bit here, a little bit like that, and then working towards the execution of that. Um, if that's true for you, then the answer is no. Like you'll always be seeking something that is only just out of reach. I remind us again of my favorite quote from Pablo Casals when asked about, why do you, at the age of 90, Pablo Casals, why do you still practice your scales? Pablo Casals' response, because I'm seeing improvement. I think he says, because I think I'm seeing improvement. I think that's the quote. And it's the I think that's so fantastic. Um, because it's that pondering of it, that wonder, I think that kind of fuels us and keeps us reaching in what would otherwise perhaps be seen as a sort of endless cycle of never really getting there, but always kind of trying to move forward. Kiwi girl, Auckland is in the North Island of New Zealand. I don't think they're on the North Island. Very nice, Micro Greek. Auckland is right near Mordor, just south of Riven. I think it must be Rivendell, not Rivendale. But then again, I am referring to you as Micro Greek. I shouldn't probably say that. Micro Geek. Kiwi girl, go to Havelock North. That sounds really familiar. I wonder if that's like north in the North Island, looks out South Pacific towards Antarctica, and the beaches are amazing. It sounds incredible. Fun fact, I got to ride one of the horses they used in the first film, one of the 3 white horses used in the Arwen scene. Wow, that's so cool. That's so cool, Kiwi girl. This is your live event. We can talk about whatever you want. If you want to talk about New Zealand, I will pull up like a map of New Zealand. I'm pretty sure I can share it online and we can go through all these points. We're just here to chat and talk about music or talk about New Zealand or whatever you like. Micro Geek. Oh, that's near my favorite horse scene in any film. Man from Snowy River is best. There you go. JC's Ready Ray. I think you have covered this before, but would you mind reminding me? Whoa! I thought it was slow, and here I am. I'm sort of waxing philosophical on tiny Greeks and tiny bazookies, little stringed instruments. And here I've got all these questions. My was feel like when one produces a contemporary sound versus a classical one. I don't know that I have covered that actually. That's a very interesting question. Um, the I feel like I must immediately issue a caveat, which is feelings are subjective. So one person's sensations of things can be utterly different from another person's sensations. In other words, when I describe to you what it feels like, it may relate to you, it may not. Additionally, with the female singing voice, because the zona de passaggio or the level of activity of the cricothyroid muscles in the zona de passaggio is that area gets stretched out a lot more than in the male voice. The experiences of the transition points can be vastly different, as can be phonation in that mixed range. And I don't know that I've ever described that because I don't know if I've ever thought about what it should feel like when one produces a contemporary sound. I don't think about it that way. I mostly focus on balance of the vowels so that we get as efficient and balanced use of our voice as possible. That facilitates good transitions across the secondo passaggio. That facilitates dynamics and the making of music. What I have said is that we make compromises in adapting our technique to the popular genres. That the technique that I am teaching and the technique I would argue, in fact, that most vocal techniques are repackaged bel canto technique. When you start to pull out the little catchphrases and you take just a look stripped away of the language of what they're teaching, it is regularly bel canto. Very popular methods, are like this, even though some of them are franchised, if you get my drift. Um, but frequently they will only deal with specific aspects of it, uh, and uh, and not really go through all of the different facets that bel canto has to offer. Even what I teach is a hybridized um, methodology, which is sort of bel canto filtered through Richard Miller, filtered through me, and what I'm trying to achieve, which is better overall vocal technique and an understanding of the vocal mechanism for popular singers. That's what I'm doing. Um, but that's and as such, we make compromises, and so we don't necessarily reap all the benefits. Um, but then again, we don't want to go and sing, a Journey song sounding like a classical singer. That's not going to work either. So we accept some compromises in order to stay in the vernacular. Micro Geek JC's blast of brilliance. Compare Adele to Maria Callas. Goodness me, I think I'm gonna pass on that. 26 minutes. I know I'm gonna make up for this one, Mrs. Webster. You just wait. At Mrs. Webster, hope you're okay. JC Ray, Micro Geek, and at me. My question is more about tongue placement, vowel placement, mask involvement. It's a very big question. Um, uh, overall resonance. I would say that the classical voice still has plenty of ping or point, as the bel canto folks would call it. Um, Contemporary techniques would call that mask resonance, um, but it's perhaps not quite so brilliant as it might be in the popular musician. Tongue placement for the vowels is going to be quite similar. I mean, and I don't really, vowel placement is, the notion of placing vowels is uh, unfortunately perpetuated widely. And I even talk about it in a minimal capacity because it's the way that we talk about it, but it's not really a great way of thinking about it. Um, So tongue placement is going to change depending on the vowel. Typically, it's slightly elevated in the rear of the R cavity, but that's a generalization, so it is inherently wrong. It is allowed to shift, and the point of all of this is to remain flexible, that these soft tissues need to remain flexible in order to facilitate whatever it is coming next. That being said, we're not going to allow for quite as much, how to say this, um, in remaining in the popular genres. Oh, I forgot to turn. Hopefully, you can still hear me. Okay, I forgot to readjust that after I was singing all that stuff. Um, it's we're not allowing for as much optimization as you might if you're a classical vocalist singing classical tunes. Um, this is a huge question. It's a huge question. I was talking with an opera singer a few weeks back, and the comment was that singing an aria requires this extremely high degree of precision, and I agree with that. But I would argue that singing popular music requires it. Does it require? I don't know. I think that there are perhaps there's more there might be more latitude in some degrees in terms of tone quality and what is expected of the popular vocalist. Certainly, when you sing an aria, there's an expected sound. For the popular vocalist, there isn't so much, not nearly so specific a concept of what you should sound like. There's much latitude given to the individual artists. But I would argue that, the classical vocalist has much more leeway with the way that they modify their vowels above the secondo passaggio to accommodate the range, whereas the popular vocalist does have latitude, but depending on the situation, less so than the classical vocalist in musical theater, where there's a really, really high degree of a necessity of intelligibility. You have to communicate the lyrics, right? They need to, because the story is contained there. So you cannot modify the vowels so much that it ultimately distorts the word and becomes something else. That's a constraint that has to be dealt with and requires a lot of precision. And especially if it's in the upper register of your voice, you have to navigate that very carefully. It's a different kind of precision. What is the best way to recover vocally after singing in a smoking venue? Cleaning out my throat and nose. If I don't do anything and let the smoke sit there, I'm sick for a week. I'm really sorry to hear that. Goodness me, I would avoid it, honestly. The best way to recover from that is to not do it in the first place. If it cannot be helped, I would show up literally 2 minutes before like sound check, and then I would leave, and I would show up 2 minutes before the gig and then leave. I wouldn't stay in the building during breaks. I would just get out of there. I don't know. I mean, just get out. The best recovery is to just not, maybe a saltwater gargle. I mean, and this isn't just your voice. This is your health here. Like, I'm sick for a week. I mean, you haven't said your voice is wrecked for a week. You're saying you're sick for a week. If you meant your voice is wrecked for a week, that's a different thing. I thought you couldn't smoke in bars in Michigan anymore. I don't understand what's going on. I thought you were in New Zealand for a second there, but no, you're in Traverse City. Mono, when I sing head voice, it sounds very light, but childish or whiny. Yeah, it sounds like you're probably not making, am I missing something? You're probably not making a good transition across the secondo passaggio. Or if you are, you're in the very early stages of it. It takes time and it takes practice to get the resonances to balance across that transition. Light and childish, yeah. There's any number of different things that could result in your sounding that way. The way to move forward is to work on the things that we work on to facilitate our response of our head voice. That includes, breathing technique. I recommend the Apogeo breath management system. My videos are about that. Vowel modification in the zona de passaggio and across the secondo passaggio. So practicing that. I might as well say it again. I'm about to release an upper register singing course. It is going to go through all of this stuff. It is going to have specific exercises. It will have a couple dozen downloads, as well as MIDI files, so you can pull it into your own workstation and adjust it specifically to your needs. But it's a process that maybe that's the big picture item here, is that establishing good phonation in the cricothyroid dominant singing voice or head voice is a process that we practice. Mrs. Webster at Janet. Micro Geek, I'm thinking a classical voice has power and resonance with any need of I believe you meant without any need of amplification. I'm not sure Adele could pull off a show with no microphone. Maria Callas did it in an open forum outdoors. Yeah, but did she do it with like a 50,000 watt sound system? Think about that for a second. It's not an even comparison, right? You're simply not going to have a classical vocalist with a rock ensemble being louder than the rock ensemble. And if they happen to be when we sound check, then I'll turn the band up until she's not heard. I'm not saying that I would actually do that, but we could. You're comparing apples and oranges here. Furthermore, orchestral sounds have a dip between the 2 and 5K kilohertz frequency band, which is conveniently where the singer's formant or point happens to fall. Rock bands are under no such constraints, so it's not the same thing, not the same thing at all to compare the two. Aaron, support helps make head voice headache strong. I think you meant head voice, and you're right. Yes, there you go. Jason Ray at Micro Geek. I studied classical voice. My challenge is maintaining contemporary style without slipping back into a classical sound. Micro Geek, thumbs up. Jason Ray, thanks, Jeff. I'll strive for a mezzo piano sound level. I think that's a good idea. Micro Geek, Jeff, I'm thankful for your help all around in the channel. Although I have been singing way more than doing any exercises of yours, I feel kind of easier feeling when I sing my notes. Brilliant. Well done. 32 minutes, drink tea. Glad this is tea, or we'd all be loopy. JC's Radiant Ray, Mrs. Webster. Oh, Mrs. Webster. Someone's knocking on my door, but I'm not going to go and get it. I hope it's okay. I'd like to ask you, since I'm 16, if I practice around 2 hours every single day, by the age of 18, will my voice be smoother and better? Also, what do you recommend to work on mostly, exercises or singing? Well, good-o to you for maintaining a good practice. That's awesome. 2 hours is quite a lot, but that's cool. I would recommend okay, so warm-ups and vocalizations are very similar, right? Like we use warm-ups as vocalizations. Vocalizations are warm-ups. I've said this before. The warm-ups on my channel are vocalizations. They are meant to help you weed through the inconsistencies in your voice and establish really, really good alignment of vowels and good phonation. So with that in mind, 15 to 20 minutes of that is probably really good, and then use the rest of your time for singing your repertoire. But I would insert the caveat of working on your repertoire doesn't mean just singing through the tunes. It means perhaps singing through it, identifying the parts that are troublesome, or if there are intonation discrepancies, if there's this, that, or the other thing, and then figuring out what you're going to do to work on that. Case in point, there's a playlist on my channel. It's like lyrical something. How to sing lyric phrases, I think, is the name of the playlist. And in there, I go through the process of deconstructing a melody, working on the melody, and then putting it back into context. And it's, you might do it only on that little couple bars, that only on the lip trill, and then use just a vowel. Maybe bring it down so that you can look at the vowel content specifically. Remove the consonants and only do the vowels. And then put the consonants back in, and then work your way back up to the performance key area. Working on your phrases in that very, very specific way will help just help the whole tune, but it'll really make those problem spots get integrated into your overall vocal technique and make them sound way better. I watch another YouTuber that appears to still have fan funding. Small in the chat box. Is that still fan funding, or is it possibly a plugin? Maybe wrong form, but I know you mentioned that's the new YouTube thing. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've chosen not to do that. That's called what is that called? Super chat, which I don't think makes the chat super. What it is in the chat, like on these live events, that window, I guess, would appear, and then you could like make a donation. But the thing is that it then like takes it basically makes this like a bidding war for in my chat. Those would pop to the very top of my chat feed based upon the dollar figure. And then, I would then answer those questions ahead of people who were choosing not to contribute. And it's not that I can't use the help. That's certainly not the case. But I don't want to do it like that. That doesn't feel right to me. And so I have chosen not to enable super chat on my channel. Ready Player One. I do enjoy that. Oh wait, did I skip? No, I didn't. Ready Player One. Hey Jeff, how long do you sing for each day? That depends on if you count my lessons. On Thursday I sang. I try not to sing. It's not that I avoid singing in my teaching. It's just that it's not about me. It's about teaching people and facilitating things. But I do end up singing a reasonable amount in my lessons. So like on Thursday, I think I taught for 7 hours or something like that. And the aggregate of that ends up being, probably an hour or 2 hours worth of singing. The difficult thing for me is managing how much I talk and making sure I use my voice carefully in my speaking voice. Like I'm wearing a microphone right now. That helps me to understand not to talk at my computer. I don't want to be like the old guy on his lawn, like yelling at the computer, which I feel I'm probably doing anyway. But then I had another mic in my face, which helps even more with that. But because of the polar pattern on the mic, people couldn't hear the piano adequately, so I had to ditch it. But given my druthers of doing a nice 15 to 20 minute warm up and then an hour or two of work on songs or work in the studio, that would probably be my preference. But yeah, I can easily rack up a couple hours of singing just in demonstrating exercises and things like that in lessons, much less any amount of warm-ups I may do before getting into the day. At Mrs. Webster. Boom, I knew I was behind. Where are we here? I lost it. Open Broadcaster, check it out. I think I've missed something. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Micro Geek. Open Broadcaster. I'll have a look. Is that like a YouTuber? At Micro Geek at Mrs. Webster, hashtag Mrs. Webster. Hey, Maddie, good to see you there. Wow, guys, this has been such a fun time together. Please, let's continue to discuss via the Facebook group. Sequencer, thank you, Mrs. Webster. Sequencer, a global voice. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, head over to Facebook and do a search for Sequencer, a global voice. It's a closed group, so you have to ask, but just ask, and I'll let you hop on in, and you can get the thing going again. Hello, Jeff. Gosh, finishing your sophomore year. I remember, if I remember correctly, I remember when you were just going off to university. Oh, wonderful. Have a wonderful time in England and Paris. Paris is one of my favorite cities. At Maddie. Thank you, Jeff. I caught your drift. Sorry to bring everyone down. If it helps, I worked with 14 nations this week, including a Kiwi gentleman who flew 30 hours. My granddad flew for Air New Zealand internationally as an engineer. That's so cool. Tenebris, work towards balance. You will find your tone within. I like to say you have to come through. You have to go through it. That's a totally subjective philosophical way to. There's no objective description of anything in that. Jeff, thanks for the clarification. Contemporary and classical. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that in that way. It's something to think about. Hello, Kiwi girl at Scagno. Yes, it was a very interesting question. Agreed. Jatavian, Jateris, Jevra. Ooh, good questions. Laughing on now. Who drinks the tea? Skanyo. I hope I'm pronouncing that. Could you describe the feeling that one feels when he is singing wrong and identify it? If it hurts, that's the clearest far way to know that you're not doing it right. Is if it hurts, it shouldn't hurt, man. At Mrs. Webster, Ready Player One. I'm not old yet, but I'm getting there. As are we all, I suppose. Maddie Hendricks, actor flautista. A confusion I have is that of men having a head voice. Some pros say men do not sing in head voice, just in falsetto. Yes, that's true. Others do say otherwise. As a countertenor, nothing about music. Oh, wait a minute. That skipped ahead. Who's right? Actor flautista in the... That's an interesting question, and I'm very glad that you asked it. I actually got a little bit more clarification on this. In fact, today, while I was doing some reading in anticipation of our live event, vocal scientists typically only refer to the human voice as having two registers, and so I think that's where some schools of voice have gotten that, having only a chest voice and a falsetto. However, in the classical, the vast majority of classical pedagogical vocal methods delineated as three different methodologies: chest voice, head voice, where the cricothyroid muscles are acting on the vocalis, thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice, vocalis musculature, and then falsetto, where there's an abduction of the vocal fold. And that's a fairly succinct description of the physical responses that are happening between those three. The fact is that as a singer, we go through these, or we can go through these. Not everyone develops them all. But depending on the school that you're studying in or whom you're speaking to, they may not agree or recognize them. Skanyu. No, that's not a umlaut, is it? It's an O, skanyo. Goodness, there's so much you can learn online. There's lots and lots. Musictheory.net is one of my favorite websites that I refer to people all the time, and that's where you could do some music theory stuff. Obviously, there's lots and lots you can learn on YouTube too. Wondering how to get the squeakiness out of my voice at the top of my range above the break. Depends on what's going on up there. Without hearing you, it sounds to me like you're probably allowing the larynx to rise. The process of keeping the larynx in a neutral to lowered position can be somewhat protracted. It can take a little bit of time, but if you check out my How to Sing High Notes course, or How to Sing High Notes, like parts 1, 2, and 3, that's on YouTube. And my upper register singing course is going to be coming out in the next month or two. You can get updates on that by going and getting on my newsletter at jeffrolka.com. Would it be wise to sing the song an octave above what he sings? I'd have to hear the song and know a bit more about your voice. Depends on where it is. I don't know that musical. But Kiwi Girl, we can always get in touch via email. It's easy to get in touch with me on my website, jeffrolka.com. Send an email and we can chit-chat about it. I have a playlist of your baritone warm-up videos and other. I've been in choir since I was in 7th grade and I'm in 9th. Do you think your videos will help me on some way with my voice? Probably. It's not just what you sing, it's how you sing it and how you focus on it. You've got to have an objective ear, or you can record yourself and then reflect on it after the fact, listening for differences in phonation. If you don't have good vowel alignment, and you could be practicing incorrectly, that would be unfortunate. Everybody, thank you so much. Really great to hang, great questions, lots of interesting stuff. Mrs. Webster, fun playing the game with you. Next time I'll make a cup of tea for myself. Have a great week, everybody. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing. Come back next week, or see me on Twitter and see me in the thing. See me on Sequencer. See me on the flip side. Bye, everybody.